Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are strapping in for, well, one of history's great vanishing acts.
Oh, absolutely.
This isn't just an unsolved crime. It's really the definitive case study in audacity, meticulous planning, and just the sheer power of vanishing into thin air.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about the perfect crime, really. Executed by a man who bought a ticket, ordered a drink, demanded a fortune,
Yeah.
and then literally flew away with it.
It occupies such a unique place in American lore because it challenges that fundamental assumption that authorities will always catch up. I mean,
Right.
50 years later, D.B. Cooper isn't just a suspect. He's a shadow. He's a riddle built entirely out of a single audacious action. We have mountains of circumstantial evidence, and yet absolutely no body, no confirmed identity, and no definitive proof he even survived.
Absolutely. The scene is set on Thanksgiving Eve, November 24th, 1971. Tonight we are opening Case File 71305, The Mystery of D.B. Cooper.
And our mission for this deep dive is to give you a complete, structured understanding of why this case remains so baffling. We're going to unpack the four core parts of this legend.
Okay.
First, the surgical precision of the hijacking plan. Then the technical details of his unprecedented escape. After that, the shockingly scarce and contradictory physical evidence the FBI gathered over decades. And finally, the enduring, competing theories about who he was and where he went.
And the stakes couldn't be higher for the historical record. Cooper remains the only person to successfully commit air piracy in commercial aviation history in the U.S. and get away with it.
Even if we assume he died moments later.
All right, even then. The file is officially suspended, but the questions still hang in the air, much like Cooper himself, somewhere over the rugged Pacific Northwest. Okay, let's unpack this and start with the man, the methodology, and the moment he moved from passenger to pirate. So let's start at the very beginning of the timeline. The crime began on the afternoon of November 24th, 1971, which was, critically, Thanksgiving Eve.
And that timing probably wasn't accidental. You know, the airports, the systems, they'd be slightly distracted, maybe less rigorous.
A man who identified himself as Dan Cooper, a name that later got kind of garbled into DB by the press. He purchased a one-way ticket on Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305.
Just a short hop.
A short standard hop from Portland, Oregon to Seattle, Washington.
And that simple one-way ticket, it tells us a great deal. It eliminates the need for baggage, return plans, or any paper trail beyond that initial purchase. But what truly makes him remarkable is the impression he made. Hijackers are often, desperate, twitchy.
Yeah, they blend in.
They blend into the lowest common denominator. Cooper did the opposite.
He cultivated an image. The descriptions from the crew, they paint this picture of the gentleman bandit. He was quiet, likely in his mid-40s, and most importantly, meticulously dressed. He wore a dark suit, a perfectly knotted black tie, sunglasses, even indoors. And he wore that small, specific detail that every investigator focuses on, a distinctive mother-of-pearl tie clip.
That tie clip, the suit, the whole presentation, it's an attempt to project authority, competence, and a sort of non-threatening professionalism.
Right.
He wasn't aiming for invisibility. He was aiming for respect and compliance. Sitting comfortably in the back of the plane, C-18C, he ordered a bourbon and soda and just calmly waited for the plane to reach cruising altitude.
Like it was any other business trip.
It's an image of controlled patience. It suggests this whole plan had been rehearsed internally probably many, many times.
He wasn't shaking, he wasn't muttering, he just waited for the right moment. And then, shortly after takeoff, the moment of execution arrived. He motioned to the flight attendant, Florence Schaffner, who was working the aisle, and handed her a folded note.
And this initial interaction is almost a classic cinematic misdirection. Schaffner later recounted that she barely even looked at the note.
Right, she just assumed.
She assumed, quite understandably, that it was a lonely, maybe slightly cheesy businessman trying to flirt or pass her his phone number. She just tucked the note into her pocket and started to move on.
But Cooper wasn't interested in the date. He corrected her with a crucial whisper. And that whisper changed the entire dynamic of the flight instantly.
What did he say?
He leaned in and said, "Miss, you better look at that note. I have a bomb."
Just like that. The whisper was the operational key. It forced immediate attention and compliance. So when Schaffner went to sit beside him, he reiterated the threat, and then he provided the visual proof.
He opened his briefcase.
Just enough for her to clearly see the contents. She described several red cylinders, maybe dynamite sticks or flares, all wired together with a battery and what looked like a timer. That momentary visual confirmation was all it took. From that instant, there was no doubt in the crew's mind that the threat was real, imminent, and required total obedience.
Now let's talk about the demands. These were not generic demands for, a lot of money and a safe passage. They were engineered. They suggest a deep understanding of logistics and risk management.
What's fascinating here is the sheer specificity, which speaks directly to an analytical mind. The demands broke down into 3 interlocking parts, all designed to facilitate a very specific type of escape.
So first, the money. He asked for $200,000 in negotiable American currency.
And specifically, he demanded that the money be delivered in $20 bills.
Okay, why is that detail so important?
Well, it's crucial for 2 reasons: weight and traceability. $200,000 in 20s is 10,000 individual notes.
Wow.
And while this makes the cash bulky and difficult to carry, we're talking around 21 pounds, it also creates a logistical nightmare for the FBI trying to track it.
How so?
Larger bills, like hundreds, are quicker to count and easier for banks to flag. By demanding 20s, he forced the FBI to scramble to quickly gather a massive quantity of bills from different institutions. That increases the chances of receiving untraceable, non-sequential cash, even though the FBI meticulously recorded every single serial number.
And just for context, that $200,000 in 1971, that's worth what today? Over $1 million.
Approximately $1.3 million today. So a truly significant payoff.
Okay, so that's the money. What were the other demands?
Secondly, the logistics for the plane were set before they even landed. A fully fueled truck had to be standing by in Seattle to refuel the Boeing 727 on arrival.
No delays.
No delays. It shows he was already planning the immediate transition to the escape phase.
And thirdly,
The most telling demand, the one that really signals his expertise, the parachutes.
the 4 parachutes.
4 parachutes were demanded, 2 main and 2 reserve. And this is a detail that baffled investigators at first. Why 4?
He used a single jumper. He needed, at most, 1 operational set. So why demand all the redundant equipment?
That demand signals a complete distrust of the authorities, combined with real operational knowledge. He was essentially hedging his bets.
Okay.
By demanding 4 sets, 2 of each type, he was ensuring redundancy. The FBI was under pressure to deliver the chutes quickly. Cooper knew they might try to sabotage them.
Right, give him a dud.
Exactly. Give him unusable dummies, non-functional packs, or more subtly, maybe use training chutes that wouldn't open properly, or chutes of the wrong type for the jump. By demanding 4, he maximized the chances that he would receive at least 1 high-quality military-grade rig that was safe and operational for his use.
It's like he's playing chess with them.
The specificity signals that he understood the psychology of dealing with government negotiators who might try to trick him.
It really speaks to a deeply cynical but highly prepared mind. He didn't just want cash. He wanted an exit strategy guaranteed by forced redundancy and logistical control. The entire plan, from the tie to the currency to the chutes. It just screams specialist.
All right. So the first phase of the plan wraps up successfully in Seattle. The pilot, William Scott, he lands the Boeing 727, and the plan now shifts from threat to transaction. And Cooper proves his control by managing the exchange perfectly while keeping all his leverage intact.
He maintained absolute psychological and physical control over that aircraft.
Yeah.
He allowed the 36 innocent passengers to be released immediately. So the trade was their freedom for the money and the chutes.
Exactly. It demonstrated he was only interested in the transaction, not a prolonged hostage situation. But, critically, he isolated his assets. He kept the essential flight crew, the pilot, the co-pilot, the flight engineer, and at least 1 flight attendant on board.
They were his guarantee.
They were his guarantee for the second critical stage of the escape.
So once the money and the 4 parachutes were delivered to the cabin, the plane was refueled. The crew was ordered to prepare for the next takeoff. And Cooper names the flight plan: straight to Mexico City.
A destination so far away, it would require massive amounts of fuel, again creating a logistical problem for authorities trying to track them.
But the real destination, his exit point, was only minutes away.
The Mexico City destination was strategic misdirection. It ensured the plane was fueled for the long haul, giving him maximum time in the air. But the true genius of Cooper's planning is revealed in the highly specific and technical flight instructions he issued for the crew during that second leg.
These weren't the instructions of a layperson.
Not at all. They were precise operational commands for a very specific mid-flight maneuver.
And these instructions are what really solidify the belief that Cooper had specialized operational knowledge, either like high-end military tactical experience, or extensive commercial aviation maintenance expertise.
Probably dealing with the 727 itself.
Exactly.
Absolutely. He dictated 3 highly unusual protocols for a commercial flight, all of which are essential for a successful low-altitude jump. First, fly under 10,000 feet.
And why is that altitude limit so important?
It's critical because it ensures the oxygen density is high enough to breathe comfortably. It also reduces the risk of instant freezing, which happens very quickly at commercial cruising altitudes of, 30,000 feet or more.
Okay, so that's one. What was the second instruction?
Second, keep the landing gear down.
Which sounds very strange for a plane that's in the air.
It's an intentional way to create maximum drag and burn excessive fuel, forcing the plane to fly at its minimal safe speed, or what's called the lowest controllable airspeed.
So he's slowing the plane down as much as possible.
As much as is safely possible. And third, leave the cabin unpressurized. This is perhaps the most technical and critical demand of all.
Why?
The Boeing 727 was, at the time, unique because it featured an aft air stair, those distinctive stairs that lowered from the tail section of the plane.
Right, I can picture them.
That mechanism was designed for ground servicing, not for mid-flight deployment. If the cabin was pressurized, attempting to open that door mid-flight would result in explosive decompression. It would likely tear the door off and potentially cripple the aircraft. Cooper knew this.
So let's unpack that specific knowledge for the listener. He understood the structural limitations of the 727. By forcing the gear down, he was guaranteeing the plane was traveling at or below the maximum operating speed for that air stair to be deployed safely.
That's right.
He knew exactly what speed and pressure envelope he needed to survive the jump and keep the crew alive.
That's the operational knowledge at work. The flight engineer later stated that they were flying at roughly 170 knots, around 200 miles per hour, but the altitude was somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000 feet. It was a slow, lumbering, controllable flight path directly over his planned drop zone. It eliminated the primary risks associated with high-speed, high-altitude jumps.
They took off from Seattle and flew south, heading toward Portland again. The plane is laboring, dragging its gear, moving slowly through the stormy skies of the Pacific Northwest. The crew was kept forward in the cockpit, away from him, separated by the main cabin. And then, somewhere over the heavily forested, rugged terrain of southwestern Washington, in the freezing night and a heavy rainstorm, he made his move.
This is the truly cinematic moment that elevates this crime to legend. Cooper manually triggered the lowering of the aft air stair. He was in the back of the plane, in the dark, possibly using a light source to check his gear, and entirely alone. He selected one of the parachutes. It appears he chose a non-steerable military reserve chute, though this is still debated, strapped the money to his body, and stepped out onto the stairs.
And then he jumped. He disappeared into the stormy abyss, taking the full ransom with him.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of air piracy, this was an act of unmatched, calculated boldness. Hijackers had used parachutes before, but never from a modern commercial jet, and never successfully disappearing with the cash. It was the ultimate defiant exit.
And the fact he chose to do it over that terrain, in that weather.
It only underscores the risk, or perhaps his confidence in navigating that risk.
The crew only realized he was gone when they noticed the tail of the plane lurching, which signaled the deployment of the stairs. They flew on, landing in Reno, Nevada, for that anticipated refueling stop. When ground crews rushed the plane, the crucial evidence wasn't what was on board, but the chilling position of the aircraft's hardware.
The air stair was down?
The air stair was down, violently exposed to the elements, and D.B. Cooper, the gentleman bandit, was gone, never seen again.
And the immediate reaction from the FBI and aviation experts wasn't awe. It was severe skepticism that he could have possibly survived.
You think so?
I mean, even with the meticulous flight controls, jumping at night into a storm over a forest with minimal protection, it suggests a probability of death nearing 100%. The money, however, was also gone. And so, the decades-long, immensely frustrating investigation, codenamed Norjack, was launched.
The manhunt began immediately. The FBI flooded the suspected jump zone, which was a huge, dense area spanning the border region between Washington and Oregon. The challenge was just immense.
You're talking about searching thousands of square miles of thick forest and rugged terrain. They launched what was dubbed Norjack Northwest Orient Airlines hijacking.
And the initial challenge was the sheer scarcity of physical evidence, right?
It was. They had the plane, they had the crew's testimony, and they had the serial numbers of the ransom money. But they had no body, no confirmed landing site, and initially very little that spoke directly to the identity of the man who had briefly occupied seat 18C.
They did, however, have one small overlooked piece of clothing left behind. Cooper's clip-on tie.
For years, it was just an item of clothing, a piece of material from a professionally dressed man. But as forensic science advanced, this unassuming tie became the key to unlocking Cooper's potential career background.
This is where the investigation really transitions from a simple ground search to genuine high-tech forensics, performed decades after the crime.
Exactly. Years after the initial searches failed, the tie was subjected to the most intense scrutiny using electron microscope analysis. This wasn't the traditional fingerprinting or hair analysis. This was looking at microscopic, nearly invisible particulates embedded deep within the fabric of the tie itself.
And the findings were extraordinary. They provided the single most compelling piece of physical evidence regarding Cooper's potential professional life. What exactly did the electron microscope reveal?
It revealed trace particles of pure titanium and several rare earth elements, including cerium and strontium.
Pure titanium.
Pure titanium. This is not common environmental dust. Pure titanium is extremely resistant to corrosion and is used in highly specialized manufacturing. Aerospace components, high-stress metal alloys, chemical processing equipment, places where contamination is fatal to the process.
And the rare earth elements.
Similarly used in specialized chemical, metallurgical, and advanced electronics manufacturing.
So let's synthesize what this implies for the man they were chasing. A man who displays sophisticated operational knowledge of the unique mechanics of a Boeing 727 is now physically linked by forensic evidence to the high-tech, potentially aerospace or specialized chemical processing industry.
It creates an incredibly specific profile. Cooper was almost certainly not a common thief or an unemployed laborer. He was likely an engineer, a technician, or maybe a manager who worked daily with advanced industrial materials.
And given that Boeing, a global leader in aerospace, is the dominant employer in the Seattle-Portland region where the crime originated,
the implication is powerful. D.B. Cooper might have been an insider, an employee, or someone working for a major supplier with daily exposure to these highly specialized elements.
But wait, is there a chance of contamination?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if the tie sat in an FBI evidence locker for years, or if the plane itself had trace elements of titanium, couldn't the finding be just incidental?
That's a fair and critical point, and one the analysts took pains to address. They concluded that the specific combination of pure titanium and these particular rare earth elements and the density they found it makes environmental or lab contamination statistically unlikely.
So it wasn't just random dust?
No. It suggested repeated, close exposure, the kind of exposure you get from working with these materials day in and day out. This piece of evidence significantly narrowed the search pool from millions of potential suspects to perhaps just hundreds or thousands of people with that specific professional access.
And despite this high-tech clue, the hunt stalled. Then, 9 years later, the ultimate physical clue appeared, a clue that was both a revelation and a profound complication.
The money.
The money.
The discovery of the money in February 1980 just threw a wrench into decades of investigative assumptions. A young boy named Brian Ingram was playing on a sandbar known as Tina Bar along the Columbia River.
Which separates Washington and Oregon.
Exactly. And he unearthed 3 deteriorating bundles of cash totaling $5,800.
And the verification was immediate and absolute. Right, the serial numbers matched.
They matched the ransom money given to Cooper. It was irrefutable. And the location was critical, too. The drop zone was generally believed to be south of Seattle, and the Columbia River flows through that region.
Right.
The location of Tina Bar is about 20 miles downstream from the general flight path of the 727, but it's also significantly north of where the FBI had initially concentrated their searches. This discovery immediately sparked the primary debate that continues to define the case.
Okay, so this is where we get the two big conflicting interpretations.
Exactly. Option A, Cooper died in the jump, just as the FBI always suspected.
The conditions were unsurvivable.
Unsurvivable. He either landed in the river or the money, still strapped to his body, was eventually washed downstream. The condition of the bills rotting, deteriorated, bound with what looked like degraded rubber bands, that strongly supports the idea of being submerged or exposed to the turbulent river environment for 9 long years.
And this conclusion fit the FBI's narrative.
It allowed them to breathe a sigh of relief. The expert planning failed due to the amateur execution of the jump, and the river was just the passive carrier of the lost treasure. They even commissioned hydrological studies, trying to model the current and flow rates over those 9 years to see if the money could have naturally drifted from the assumed jump zone to Tina Bar.
And could it have?
The study suggested it was possible, though not certain, especially if the money had washed out of a less secure container.
But then we have the far more provocative option B, the intentional false trail.
Right. What if Cooper survived the jump, landed successfully near the river, and maybe realizing the weight and bulk of 10,000 $20 bills would seriously hamper his mobility? He intentionally buried a small portion of the cash.
So he keeps the vast majority, but ditches a traceable amount to misdirect investigators.
Precisely. Send them toward the river, away from his actual successful escape route out of the region. He'd be smart enough to know the FBI would eventually connect the dots to the Columbia River system. Burying or ditching a small amount, $5,800 is less than 3% of the total ransom, could serve as a calculated decoy, buying him crucial time.
But the extreme degradation of the bills complicates that, doesn't it?
It does. It suggests a long period of exposure, which complicates the clean burial theory.
So it's the perfect, frustrating piece of evidence.
Mm-hmm.
It answers nothing definitively about Cooper's fate, only confirming the location where some of the money ended up.
It's a physical contradiction that simultaneously supports his death and fuels the theory of his survival. The only certain thing is that the remaining $194,200 has never been recovered. So given the scarce and conflicting nature of the evidence, you've got the high-tech tie versus the suicidal conditions. The mystery has really been structured around three primary possibilities for the man and his fate.
And we should treat these as distinct investigative avenues, not just speculation.
Exactly. These are the paths the FBI and subsequent sleuths pursued to rationalize all these data points.
Okay, so let's start with the conclusion most often favored by the authorities, based entirely on the overwhelming environmental factors he faced. Theory A, he died in the jump.
This is the conclusion derived from pure physics and survival odds, often championed by the FBI. You have to consider the conditions again. He jumped into a fierce, prefrontal weather system, heavy rain, strong winds, and near-freezing temperatures, all in pitch darkness.
And the description of his attire makes the jump seem even more reckless. He was wearing an ordinary trench coat and critically soft loafers. Loafers. Not jump boots. Not suitable for protecting ankles or surviving a landing in a dense forest canopy. The lack of proper gear, combined with a hostile environment, it just drastically reduces his survival probability.
And furthermore, he used a non-steerable military reserve parachute. These chutes are designed to save you from a catastrophic equipment failure, but they offer very little directional control.
So in a storm, at low altitude, trying to steer toward any kind of safe clearing would have been
virtually impossible. The fall itself, the landing force, the impact velocity, would likely have caused catastrophic injuries. Or he would have succumbed to immediate hypothermia after landing in the cold, wet forest. Most experts concluded the combination of poor equipment, darkness, and severe weather made the execution of the jump the fatal flaw in an otherwise brilliant plan.
So the argument here is that G.B. Cooper was a genius strategist with high-level operational knowledge who made one arrogant, fatal amateur mistake in the execution of the jump.
Perhaps driven by overconfidence or a lack of real-world jumping experience outside of a specific controlled scenario. That is the Bureau's official stance. The planning was expert, the execution was suicidal.
But that didn't stop them from investigating viable suspects, especially those who committed remarkably similar crimes shortly thereafter.
Right, which brings us to Theory B, the copycat, Richard McCoy.
McCoy is an essential figure because he proved the jump was survivable given the right circumstances.
He essentially pulled off the same crime almost 5 months later, in April 1972. He was an Army Green Beret, a Vietnam veteran, and an expert parachutist who hijacked a United Airlines flight, securing $500,000 in ransom and parachuting out over Utah.
The similarities were uncanny, weren't they?
Uncanny. McCoy used a fake hand grenade instead of a bomb, but the method, the demands, the reliance on the parachuting skill set, and the fact that McCoy physically resembled the original D.B. Cooper description, it made him the immediate prime suspect for the FBI.
For a time, they thought they had him.
They genuinely believed they had solved the original Cooper case by capturing McCoy.
McCoy was eventually caught, based on the fact that he was identified after being one of the only people in Utah to purchase an expensive new car with cash shortly after the jump. But he always maintained he wasn't Cooper.
He vehemently maintained it throughout his capture and trial. And this is where the anecdote elevates the story. McCoy was convicted and incarcerated, but his story doesn't end there.
No.
He later staged one of the most incredible prison escapes in history, fashioning a dummy rifle out of a roll of tape and a bar of soap, escaping, and then subsequently attempting another hijacking.
He was a committed criminal specializing in this method.
Absolutely. But although the FBI concluded the details of the two crimes were too similar to be a coincidence, they ultimately couldn't prove he was Hooper. What McCoy did was establish that a successful, high-risk jump from a commercial plane was physically possible, provided the jumper was properly equipped and the weather was better than what Cooper faced.
So if McCoy was a copycat, not the original, then we move to Theory C, the one that has garnered the most modern attention and civilian investigation. The specialist, Robert Rackstraw.
Rackstraw's profile is compelling because he checks almost every single box required by the physical evidence. He creates a perfect synthesis of planning and ability.
What was his background?
He was a former U.S. Army Special Operations paratrooper with expertise in demolitions and aviation. That means he possessed both the tactical jumping skills and the potential technical knowledge needed to understand and calculate the precise flight instructions given to the 727 crew.
And he had a checkered military past, right?
He did. He'd been discharged for fraud, which suggests the kind of rebellious, high-risk personality required for this crime.
Furthermore, he was living in the Pacific Northwest at the time of the hijacking, which puts him in the vicinity of the crime, and his military experience would have exposed him to specialized alloys and equipment.
Potentially explaining the trace titanium found on the tie.
Exactly.
The modern investigation, which was heavily fueled by civilian sleuths after the FBI officially suspended the case, focused almost entirely on Rackstraw. They pointed to the fact that he had the background, the access, and the motive. There is also alleged communication linking him to the crime match. Investigators found coded letters, possibly containing phrases only Cooper would know, that were purported to be from him.
But that's hard to prove.
Impossible to prove. The evidence remains highly circumstantial.
So what was the ultimate roadblock, the thing that prevented the FBI from ever charging Rackstraw definitively? It comes down to that single piece of physical evidence again, doesn't it? The tie.
The clip-on tie.
Was there ever a definitive DNA match or forensic link to definitively place Robert Rackstraw in seat 18C?
No. Despite the compelling circumstantial profile, the military background, the tactical knowledge, the proximity, a confirmed positive DNA match between Rackstraw and the biological material recovered from the tie never materialized.
And that's the pattern, isn't it?
It is. This pattern of finding strong circumstantial evidence that just fizzles out upon definitive forensic analysis is, sadly, the enduring feature of the entire Cooper investigation. The strongest leads always remain tantalizingly unproven.
And that leads us to where we are now, the current status quo.
In 2016, recognizing that they had exhausted all viable scientific and forensic leads, including modern DNA testing that failed to find a definitive match, the FBI officially suspended the active investigation. They essentially declared the case cold, transferring the file to inactive status.
So the official hunt ended, but the legend solidified.
It did. Cooper transitioned from a dangerous criminal to a kind of anti-hero, a folk figure. He became the gentleman bandit, a daring, successful figure who executed a massive score, hurt no one on the plane, and successfully vanished, beating the entire system and disappearing into American mythology. He proved that sometimes the legend is stronger than the facts.